For those who are sick of hearing about Donald Trump's campaign for 2024's Republican nomination, today may be a welcome change for you. We are going to take a deeper dive into the last 48 hours of the Ron DeSantis candidacy for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. Now, one of the things that will not please those who are sick of hearing about Trump is that DeSantis is widely emulating Trump so far in the early days of his campaign in a number of different ways, including even some of the insults that Trump became famous for. So Ron DeSantis spoke in Iowa yesterday, and there are a number of different disturbing and comical realities. First and foremost, we talked yesterday about how Ron DeSantis said he would very much consider pardoning Donald Trump if he were to become president. If you're running against Trump, you're not going to win by saying, I'll pardon him, because the people who want Trump will vote for Trump. And the people who are disgusted by Trump aren't going to want to go with the guy that says, I will pardon Trump, who you want to get away from. You're not going to beat Trump by avoiding conflict and criticism the way that DeSantis has done to a degree in the pre-campaign stages of the last few months. And you're certainly not going to defeat Trump by using the same insults that some people like, in which case they'd vote for Trump, and some people don't like, in which case they're not going to vote for the guy copying the insults. And Ron DeSantis yesterday during this speech in Iowa, going with the Biden is in the basement thing, which is a Trump thing. This was Trump's line throughout the 2020 campaign.
Our great American comeback starts by sending Joe Biden back to his basement in Delaware.
Okay. You're not going to win this way, Ron. I mean, this is, if there's a couple different issues here. First, he needs to defeat Trump before he gets a shot at Joe Biden. And so you all know I don't get into this whole alpha, beta way of discussing everything. By the standards of these right wingers, it's not very alpha to go after the guy you're not even running against in order to avoid conflict with the guy who's actually up 30 points in the polls. Now, we're going to talk about polling a little bit later, because since his announcement, DeSantis is actually up 15% in the polling. Now, let's remember, 15% and 15 percentage points are two different things. Before I get emails saying, David, what are you talking about? DeSantis is up 15% in the polls. We'll talk about that later. But this seems to be a bump and not a shift in the underlying dynamics of this campaign, which are that the majority of the Republican Party is fine with Trump. And those that aren't looking for a guy with the same insults and the same hand movements who's unwilling to actually take Trump on head on and instead is going to go after Joe Biden. All right, let's look at some more clips from this speech. Here is DeSantis talking about the debt deal. And, you know, one of the really interesting things about American politics, where there's a history of state level officials vying for national office. Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas and then ran for president. What Bill Clinton had that DeSantis very much does not have is that even though Bill Clinton was this sort of folksy southern state governor, when his campaign for president launched and he was talking about foreign policy and debt and deficit, etc., he didn't seem completely in over his head. You're going to hear Ron DeSantis talk about debt, and you will see that this state elected official seems completely out of his element and completely in over his head when discussing the topics that are relevant to the national political scene.
We now see Washington has now cooked up their latest, quote, debt deal. And I can tell you this, our nation was careening towards bankruptcy before the debt deal, and it will still be careening towards bankruptcy after this debt deal. This is greenlighting $4 trillion in new debt in less than 2 years. It took us almost 200 years to get to $4 trillion in debt in the first place.
Now, remember, when we're talking about the debt ceiling and the debt limit and all of this stuff, aside from the fact that most of these elected officials don't even have the most basic understanding of macroeconomics, like put that aside for a second, the debt limit relates to paying obligations that have already been authorized. It is not actually about new spending. When these Republicans show up and say we're to new spending, new spending, new spending, all of this spending has already been agreed upon, and it has been agreed upon by our elected officials in the House and Senate. You might say, well, I'm a Republican, and when this stuff was agreed upon, we didn't have the House or Senate. Okay, but this is the process we have. And this is all spending that has already been authorized. Now we're talking about meeting our existing obligations.
It locks in inflated COVID level era levels of spending, and it keeps 98% of the 87,000 new IRS agents that Joe Biden instituted. This is not going to solve our nation's fiscal problems. I can
So
tell
again, now we are just quite literally to Trump lines. These are now, I know you're trying to appeal to Republicans, and some of the stuff Trump does appeals to Republicans. And so you're going to have to do some of the same stuff. But at some point, how are you going to, this is Trump's lines delivered in a really just off-putting way, right? I mean, it's going to be dead, and it was bankruptcy, and I'll tell. So it's the Trump lines delivered in a whinier voice.
in Florida, we run budget surpluses. We have a $1.2 trillion GDP in Florida. We'd be the 13th largest economy in the world if we were a separate country, and yet with $1.2 trillion economy, our state debt is only $17 billion.
All right. So the crowd not super engaged, as you can see, and DeSantis offering nothing that we might qualify as inspiring. Then he went completely off the rails in delusions of grandeur, saying he believes we can bring George Washington back. And this is when, I mean, listen, there is some narcissism probably required to even think, hey, I should run for president. Maybe people will vote for me. But this is really too much.
Bureaucracy is so entrenched that I think we can bring George Washington back.
Can you?
And I don't think he could fix it in one single 4-year term. We must
But DeSantis can do it in 2 terms. That's the great news.
restore sanity to our nation. We can't have every major institution in our country going on ideological joyrides. We have to be guided by reality, by facts, and by our enduring principles. We in the state of Florida held the line when freedom hung in the balance.
Yeah. So there is nothing I am seeing here that makes me think this is electric in a way that it's going to put Trump out with Republican voters. The biggest argument that DeSantis is making is Florida good. I make America like Florida. I am going to argue next that that would be a disaster. If you deal with anxiety or depression, you may have tried meditation, exercise, diet changes, therapy, all of which are important things to try. There is also a new treatment that we've been talking about on the program for years, which for many people has been a game changer, and that is ketamine therapy. The research around ketamine therapy for anxiety and depression looks very promising, which is why I'm thrilled about our new sponsor, MindBloom. MindBloom is the leader in at-home ketamine therapy, having safely helped thousands of people with anxiety and depression. It's delivered to your door. It's done from the comfort of your home. And unlike traditional talk therapy, ketamine works quickly and doesn't have the unpleasant side effects of traditional antidepressants. In a study of over 1,200 MindBloom clients, 89% reported improvements in their anxiety and depression after just 2 sessions. Read about the evidence for ketamine therapy. We've talked about it on the show. It's pretty remarkable stuff. MindBloom is offering my audience $100 off your first 6-session program. Go to mindbloom.com/Pacman. Use the code Pacman. The link is in the description.